Well, I must admit, I'm an American Motors fan, and to me, one of the most exciting, important, last breath cars for American Motors was the 1980 AMC Eagle. AMC had acquired Jeep from Kaiser Willys in 1970, and unfortunately, it had taken out a lot of debt in order to fund the transaction. Clearly today, Jeep is the crown jewels of what is today Stellantis, but back then, Jeeps and off-road vehicles were somewhat popular, and product planners at AMC believed that they were going to become increasingly so. But it really was the Jeep transaction that started American Motors down a pathway of financial troubles because of the debt burden that they took on in order to acquire it. And of course, along the way, there were some other miscues, like spending a fortune to bring out the 1974 Matador Coupe that was pretty much a flop in the marketplace. So by 1980, AMC had precious little capital with which to come up with new vehicle programs, hence its soon forthcoming tie-up with Renault. But it did put out one last gasp of new product in the form of the AMC Eagle when it introduced it in 1980. At the time, no one had heard the use of the term crossover or CUV or SUV. But that's really what this AMC Eagle was. In fact, one could argue it was the first domestically produced crossover vehicle. And they were, indeed, the only four-wheel drive passenger cars produced in the U.S. at the time. AMC's product planners thought that after having been burned by two fuel crises in the 1970s, that consumers would embrace a car that really was able to handle light off-road use and provide superior traction, along with a higher ride height and capabilities of a four-wheel drive vehicle. Thus, the idea for the AMC Eagle was birthed. The idea of the vehicle came from Roy Lund, who served as AMC's head of engineering from 1971 to 1987, and is really credited, consequently, with being the father of the modern SUV. Prior to his time at AMC, Lund had worked at Ford Motor Company, where he worked on vehicles including the Ford GT40 as well as the Boss 429 Mustang. But once at AMC and subsequent to AMC acquiring Jeep, Lund had the idea for an entire lineup of four-wheel drive vehicles that really had the ride and handling characteristics of a standard car. In other words, they were quite comfortable and quiet as opposed to noisy, loud, and rather large. In order to test out this idea, Lund's team originally contracted a company called FF Developments that built a prototype vehicle based on a V8-powered AMC Hornet that had a direct torque split of 1/3 of the torque of the engine going to the front wheels and 2/3 to the rear to test out the idea. Eventually, the engineering team essentially mated a Concorde body with the Jeep's four-wheel drive system and created the AMC Eagle. It was a great, cost-efficient way to use Jeep components and put them in a fuel-efficient package, unlike the Jeeps that existed at the time, which, while they would later become popular, you can imagine at this time, 10 to 12 mile per gallon vehicles were not something that was flying off of sales room floors because of the fuel prices. The Eagle was thus a very astute and cost-conscious product that plugged the hole between imported four-wheel drive vehicles like Subarus and much larger domestic four-wheel drive vehicles, including the Jeep Wagoneer, as well as the CJ series. When it was launched in the fall of 1979 as a 1980 model year vehicle for just under $7,000 base price in two-door form, base price was $6,999, or approximately $25,000 in today's dollars, the Eagle was pretty much a runaway hit, particularly given the low capital investment required to generate these sales. And in its first year, AMC sold about 33,000 Eagles. 1981 would prove even more popular for Eagle sales, with 43,000 being sold, 35,000 then in 1982, 31,000 in 1983, and Eagle sales gradually tapered off until the 1988 model year when it sold just a few thousand units. In its first year, the Eagle came in multiple body styles, including four-door sedan and wagon, as well as a two-door coupe. It had quite a bit of standard equipment for the era, including power disc brakes up front with drums in the rear and power steering, as well as white wall tires. There were several trims available, the top of the line being the upscale limited trim that had a beautiful honey-colored leather interior. And yes, there was just one color of leather available. One level down from the limited was basically the base trim, but it included features found on the Concorde DL or more luxurious Concorde, including a more rich interior. To my knowledge, Eagles were also the first vehicles to come with standard Z-Bart factory rust protection, including a 5-year no rust-through transferable warranty. And in its inaugural year, there only was one engine available, AMC's tried and true 258 cubic inch 6-cylinder engine, which made around 110 to 120 horsepower. It was coupled to a Chrysler TorqueFlite A998 transmission, and it had Dana 30 and Dana 35 differentials at front and rear, respectively. As previously mentioned, the Eagle was based on the Concorde, but in order to give it a bit more visual flair and offset the 2 to 3 inch increase in ride height, AMC added Creighton plastic wheel arch flares, and Creighton at the time was a division of AMC. Creighton also made a wonderful leaky valve cover for these vehicles that many people have since replaced and retrofitted with a metal valve cover. Since the Eagle was classified as a truck by the US EPA, it didn't have to meet the 5-mile-an-hour impact standards that passenger vehicles had to. And so its bumpers were pulled in a little bit inward from where they were on the Concorde. And the car really was an excellent machine in light off-road use or in snowy or wet weather conditions. In its first year, it had an all-wheel drive system that couldn't be disconnected or switched between 2- and 4-wheel drive that used a viscous coupling in order to divert power to the front or rear wheels based on which were slipping. It was effective, and it also enabled the system to be engaged full-time while the driver could go around corners and not worry about wheels chattering or harming the driveline. As the Eagle soldiered into 1981, a couple changes came. The first was the introduction of the Kalmbach Eagle, which was similar to the Spirit and very similar to the previous Gremlin. Kind of an awkward-looking thing, but I guess some people liked it. AMC also introduced the SX4 liftback, which was supposed to be more of a sporty Eagle, and quite handsome at that. Wonderful-looking two-door with a fastback roof profile, as well as a bulged hood, if you will. Under hood, AMC added GM's 151 cubic inch Iron Duke 4-cylinder engine. At the time, AMC had not yet developed its own 4-cylinder based on the 6-cylinder, and the 258 cubic inch 6 became and remained available in the car. It was just now optional. And midway through the model year, Select Drive was available on Eagles, which allowed a driver to switch between 2- and 4-wheel drive mode, save a bit of fuel economy, although early on in the Select Drive, driver had to stop, pull a lever out, and then engage 2- or 4-wheel drive versus being able to do it on the fly. Only a few changes came to the Eagle for 1982, including now standard low-drag disc brakes and an optional 5-speed manual transmission. Some of the gear ratios in the automatic were changed, and Select Drive was also made standard. After 1982 and in 1983, the Kalmbach, as well as the two-door sedan, were discontinued, having sold only 520 units in 1982 for the Kalmbach and under 2,000 units for the two-door sedan in 1982. AMC also replaced GM's Iron Duke underhood with its own 150 cubic inch 2.5-liter 4-cylinder that actually provided better performance than GM's engine, particularly given its elevated compression ratio. In 1984, the Eagle SX4 was dropped, really leaving just the 4-door sedan as well as the wagon. 1985 also saw some small changes, including shift-on-the-fly 4-wheel drive capability. All Eagles now had the power bulge hood, previously seen on the sport models, and the standard powertrain was now the 5-speed manual transmission and the AMC 258 cubic inch inline 6-cylinder. In 1986, the beginning of the end was near for the Eagle, and its sales dropped under 10,000 units for the first time. And it would continue dropping each model year until it was finally terminated in 1988, the only year where just a wagon was available. So what's it like to own an AMC Eagle? Well, I can speak to this from firsthand experience, given that I still own one, a 1982 AMC Eagle sedan. And I will say this, it's a super enjoyable car, just extremely fun to drive. It doesn't have much power. The six-cylinder will accelerate away from a stoplight just fine, but if you want to pass somebody going over 35 miles an hour, you had better have a lot of runway to do so. The transmission is quite smooth and robust. The engine, in spite of its lack of power and only 112-ish horsepower trying to tow around 3,500 pounds, is very rugged as well. The steering in particular feels very modern with good weight to it and on-center feel. It's also a relatively quick ratio. The brakes work relatively well. Wouldn't say that they're overly powerful or weak. The pedal is a bit mushy, as is the case for the Era, but the car does stop relatively confidently. And the handling for a car with a relatively high center of gravity isn't bad. I will say, though, that the best thing about the Eagle is that it really does put a smile on your face when you drive it. There really aren't too many inherent flaws in the car that one has to worry about. The front and rear differential are very robust, as is the engine and transmission. The componentry is also quite robust. Mine has proven to be very reliable, and I've owned it for over 10 years. I've also owned a 78 AMC Concorde for a number of years. That was also similarly reliable. So I can say that while some people wax poetically about classic cars and maybe the experience of owning them isn't so great, the AMC cars that I've owned, in particular the Eagle, has been a very reliable and enjoyable car. It's also quite comfortable inside, although you'll find that the car's width and interior room is relatively small. It's not overly large, but the seats are comfortable, particularly the front seats. The back seat is a little cramped. The radios are excellent. AMC put good radios in these vehicles. And I would say the car is at home around town, can easily cruise at 75 miles an hour if you want on the freeway, and it does so in relative quietness. So if you find an Eagle at a reasonable price, be sure to check that it isn't rusty underneath, particularly the rockers. Even though these were Z-barred from the factory, they do tend to rust in the rocker panel areas as well as the jack points in front of the rear wheels and behind the front wheels as well. But if you find one that's not rusty, in good shape, and you buy it, I think you're going to be happy. Not too many bad things to say about them, aside from AMC Fit and Finish, which was the worst of all of the domestic auto companies at the time. Oh well, that's part of the charm. Thanks again for watching this video on the AMC Eagle. Hope you enjoyed, and stay tuned for a review of my personal 1982 AMC Eagle sedan. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and hit super thanks as well. Until next time, check out the video thumbnails at bottom left and right for some suggestions for you. And if you have or know of a really nice AMC for sale, feel free to reach out to me. Thanks again for watching.